part of your visa application, you'll have given an estimated start date. Your visa is then issued, and then ideally you would need to move within 3 months, because there's an obligation to register your visa in France within 3 months of arrival. Obviously, if you don't use your visa until later on, you're cutting short. If it's been granted for a year from, say, the 1st of May, obviously it runs till the 30th of April the following year. If you don't go till the end of August, you've already lost 3 months of your visa. So people can be denied visas if they haven't evidenced adequate financial support for their stay in France, if the healthcare cover provided is more like travel insurance rather than proper private medical insurance, which is a requirement. Those are the most common ones. Generally, there'll be other smaller factors, for example, forgetting to include certain documents. But as we've experienced, you will often receive an email with a follow-up saying, please, can you also provide this in supplement to what you've already supplied us with? You can submit a fresh application, and hopefully you'll be aware of the reasons why your initial visa application was declined, so that you can provide the appropriate information and then resubmit it with that included. There's two questions that poses. The first, yes, you would need separate visas. Obviously, your husband would be inactive on a retirement visa, which has different requirements to that of a working visa. The second point is that working remotely for a US company, France does not recognise the concept of digital nomads, and therefore you would have to ensure that the company that employs you complies with all French social security and taxation laws and is set up appropriately to have an employee based in France, as well as making sure that you've got the correct paperwork for all of that yourself. Finally, considering being self-employed, if you have more than one client, you can go down this route, and of course your existing employer could be one of those that are your clients, but you cannot just have them as your sole employer as a self-employed person, because otherwise it's considered disguised employment and they would still be subject to French requirements in respect of registration for social security and taxes. And to add on, alternatively, obviously, as explained, if a company employs someone in France, they will have the obligation to register with the authorities in France in respect of employing that person. The alternative is to use a company which is based in France that employs you, and there are arrangements that can be put in place where your employer based in the US, for example, contracts with that company in France, and then you are salaried through the company in France. But please note, the charges, the social charges, etc., are still the same. It's just being done through a different route rather than the employer having to register directly in France. So in that instance, you wouldn't need to apply for a visa before you leave the US. You can both move over to France. And then there are certain steps that have to be taken at your local prefecture by the spouse who does not have an EU passport to register with the prefecture for their visa once they're in situ. But that can be done from France rather than needing to be done in advance. So when you go to renew your visa at your local prefecture, there's no hard and fast rules about whether it will or won't be accepted or rejected, but it's based on the evidence that you supply to them. So the same criteria in terms of financial stability, being able to support yourselves, in particular, depending on what type of visa you have. If it's a working visa, they'll obviously look at your business plan and whether you've hit targets and can continue to sustain yourself within France. It might be if you haven't met the targets that were in your business plan and your income is below the minimum expected monthly allowance, the SMIC in France, then potentially it could be rejected. However, if you can demonstrate other means of financially supporting yourself to that minimum wage level, then you may still be successful in renewing it. It varies in terms of length of time taking to get the visa. Your first stage will obviously be inputting it into the French government system. You then obtain your appointment time to go and present all your documentation. It will depend on what country you're applying from, what visa centre you're using for processing as to their waiting list, and it also depends on the time of year. So obviously certain times of year are busier for people submitting applications, and so for waiting times they can vary. I would suggest that a typical time you can wait anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks to get an appointment, and then between 2 and 4 weeks once you've had your appointment to receive your passport back. When you go to your visa meeting, they will take your passport from you, and you don't get that returned to you until they have determined your application and posted it back to you. Therefore, you will not be able to enter France because you will not have a passport.